So, thanks for the invitation. First of all, it's always good to be here. I was here last year for the first one. It's a very interesting conference, and I'm developing an interest in analytics and data because I think we're moving towards big data in sport. You know, we started with a stopwatch and a whistle, and we're moving to quite a lot of numbers coming in. So, what I decided to do was to give you an overview of how analytics is used in Olympic sports, what sorts of analytics people do, and where the gains might be. I'll start with very simple stuff. In Olympic sports, everybody is worried about how many medals we win, and it's always fascinating to read all the predictions before we go into the games. We will be fourth, third, second. We're going to beat the Australians, which seems to be an obsession in Britain. I still don't get it, but that's what it's all about. You know, how many medals you're going to win, and all the funding model is actually based on the ability to produce medals. That's an investment. You put money in somewhere. What you expect is medals coming back. But it's difficult, and it's becoming more and more difficult. I think a lot of people, for sure, are impressed by what happened this summer, and it looks easy. You know, everyone thinks, people that are outside sport or in other sports, they think that every time the GB cycling team turns up with their bikes, they're going to win a medal. It's not as simple as that. And I'll give you some numbers. In London, 85 national Olympic committees won a medal at the Olympic Games. And you can see here on this graph, this is the number of nations that won medals at the Olympic Games since 1980s, also because of the split of the Russian republics and Eastern Europe. There has been an increasing number of countries that are capable of winning the medal. Just to put you in context, in London, Cyprus won the first medal. Montenegro won the first medal. Montenegro won a silver medal in women's handball. Montenegro is the size of Aberdeen, and they can produce a team sport that wins a silver medal at the Olympic Games. Iran won 12 medals in London and 1 silver in discus throwing in athletics. So it's pretty competitive. It's not easy, and we know already that actually going into Rio is going to be even more competitive. We have 28 sports going into Rio, with golf and rugby 7 being added. So it's going to be incredibly difficult to maintain the same level of performance. We're now heading into the Winter Games, and it's exactly the same. Number of nations winning medals at the Winter Games, it's increasing. So it's a difficult place. It's a very challenging environment. And this is the kind of analytics we use and we kind of look at periodically, is to try to understand where the system is, how many medals are we winning on the world stage, where are the medals coming from, and how do we benchmark against other nations. And this is how it looked 1 year ago in February 2011, and you can see that we were around the 4th place in the predictions together with a number of nations. So the prediction was that we could definitely get the 4th place, and we needed a spectacular game to be 3rd. But what happened was we ended up in the 3rd place in the medal table, also because Russia won the number of medals that they were expected to win by the wrong color. So they won more silvers than golds. But that's the kind of analytics that is used. And is also used to track what the junior athletes are doing to try to understand how the future looks like. And I can tell you that the future doesn't look great at the moment if we look at how the juniors are developing in the British sporting system, because the infrastructure is actually not great. It's developing, and a new funding model might help developing that. Other use of analytics in some sports is actually to understand where performance is heading. So if you are in rowing or cycling or in sports that we call CGS, where you can measure something, or in athletics, it's kind of easy to see where performance is going and what you need to do in order to win a medal in 2016, for example, because there are some clear trends, or there are groups of athletes that in 3-4 years show certain types of performances. So if we look, for example, at, if we look, for example, at the 100 meters, if these guys keep continuing racing at the speed they are, in order to win a gold medal, you need to run 9:50, you know, in the next game. So in some sports, it's relatively easy to predict, and some of the coaches use the data to actually model what they need to do with their athletes. But that's only possible in sports where you can measure quite a lot and where you can track things. Of course, the picture becomes a bit more complicated when you talk about team sports. Some of the analytics is used also for talent ID projects. I think we moved a lot in talent ID, but I think we're still very far from ideal because we started talent ID projects around the world. It's always the same. taking pictures of how these talents look like and identifying traits. The reality is that when you just look at traits, and this is probably one of the examples in Italy, you might not know Andrew Howe, but Pietro Mennea held the 200 meters record for more than 20 years. White guy from southern Italy, he ran 1972, quite fast. And this guy came up on the Italian system. He was born in the US, then moved to Italy when he was very young with his mother, and then he started to do athletics. And when they saw his performances, they thought, this guy is the next world record holder in the 200 meters. But when you look at his development, he was never going to be as good as Mennea anyway. So what the mistake they made is that they measure a series of physical traits, and they thought this guy is much better than Mennea was when he was 15, so he's going to be better. But that's an example of taking a picture and a snapshot rather than looking at the development and the learning. And in some cases, you might get it right. If you look at Usain Bolt, when he was the same age, he was running faster than all these people. But actually, when you look at his development, that's when he gets scary. That's a guy that keeps going like that. God knows what we need to run to beat the guy. So it's important to know not only in Talent ID how these people look and what traits they have, but actually look for the most important trait. And the most important trait is how they develop. So UKA has got these performance funnels whereby they can track people and see if they are getting into the medalist zone or into the possibility to actually win a medal. And in athletics, it's possible to do that. It's pretty straightforward. As Dave was saying, if you don't run a certain time, you ain't got a chance of winning, unless it's in the relay where everyone can drop the button and you might win. But in many sports where you can measure things, this is the only way to track progress. But I think we're missing the trick, because in many sports, it's actually about tracking learning. So we need to identify some traits. Once we have identified the traits, we need to see how these traits develop. And we've been biased over the years in using analytics to understand the physical domain of a talent, whether in reality the talent is the person that survives. This is a survival element, is the people that make it to the end. And what surprises me is that we tend to do a lot of research on the people that make it, which actually is the smallest number, sample size. What we need to figure out is all the people that don't make it, why they don't make it, because that might help us in actually making the right calls at the right time. Data collection in sport has moved a lot. When I started coaching many years ago, the only thing we had was a clipboard and a stopwatch and a whistle. That was it. But now there is quite a lot of information. As Dave said, there is probably too much at times. But we can gather a lot of data from, performance analysis type, real time. We can gather data using complex systems, camera systems. We can have all sorts of information on how the players move or what the athletes do, what the activity patterns are, what's the physicality required in some sports. And then we try now to measure a variety of things to make sense of what they actually do. So, they have to go through urine collection samples, saliva samples, sweat patches, GPS, heart rate monitors, a plethora of psychometric tools to fill in, either by paper or using various smartphone applications or various sensors that can be put everywhere. It's actually become a full-time job to fill in all these numbers. And I see some of the schedules of the players or the athletes involved in all these monitoring activities. It's quite demanding. You wake up, you fill in a questionnaire, you have a pee pot to fill in, you have a saliva testing to do. Then by the time you've had your breakfast, you have 3 questionnaires. Then you get into the practice, you have to wear the GPS. It's quite demanding stuff, which is good in a way because we need to collect data. But actually, data are only important if we change coaching. And I am fascinated by the fact that, for example, we don't collect much data on coaching, because coaching is a black magic art. It's in their head. It's there. They don't give it away. Now, in some sports, things are better. For example, in cycling or in sports where, again, it's possible to measure and quantify certain things, coaches are quite educated and they measure things with distance, number of laps, and things like that. But when it comes to team sports, most of the times there isn't a training program. There is a bit of a philosophy behind, but there isn't a structure. So I think data are important, when we move coaching to an evidence-based approach, where some of the decisions are actually made based on evidence, and some of the discussions happen on some evidence. And I want to be careful in saying that, because I don't want people to think that it's going to be a computer that gives a training program. That's never going to happen. But we need data to inform the coaching process and to grow the coaching process. And you cannot teach an old dog new tricks, because most of the coaches in our system tend to be people that have been educated 20 years ago. So their terms of reference and their data are things that they could measure 20 years ago. So for example, if somebody has always made decisions on a lactate response to a rowing ergometer test and a urea value, they are not going to change unless you convince them that the plethora of data you have actually helps them making better decisions. And frankly, we are not at this stage at the moment, because we collect a lot of data, but actually very few of them can make a change in practice that is meaningful. I think performance analysis has actually been the first thing that has had a bit of a breakthrough into the world of sport, mainly because I think some of the coaches have actually realized that they're not very good at recalling events. So actually seeing things and having some numbers helps them strengthening their gut feel. So in some cases they accept it and they take it on board, but still it's quite astonishing that little research has actually been done. And I was amazed to read this paper. This was done in Cardiff in 2008. So this is football coaches. They could recall only 59.2% accurately of critical events. And it was only 17.2% better than novice coaches. So that means, how do we train the coaches? How do we educate them to get better at what they do? And how do we use data properly to make sure that they look at things in a different way or in a more critical way? And performance in sport, in high-performance sport, it's a combination of a plethora of things. I said to Dave before, I'm developing an interest for soft sciences, which is psychology. I wasn't interested in that before, but now I do a lot more, because at elite level, actually, once you get the physicality right and the athlete is healthy on the start line, there is not much difference on the physical or the tactical elements of them. But somehow somebody beats the other. And most of the times it's what's in between their ears, how they react to pressure, how they cope under certain environments. So it's impossible to really use one tool or one set of data to measure things. And this is an error I made in the past. It was about, I don't know, strength, or it was about power, or it was about a saliva indicator. Actually, you need to take the big picture and see where things are going. So we need to consider sport and any sport in the same way. So we need to identify how we manipulate all these variables to actually go towards the optimal performance status and also avoid they underperform. So the more information we have, the better it is. But at the same time, as we gather information, we then need to pick what's the relevant information and what is totally irrelevant, which is the difficulty we are now facing. And I think it's very important to understand this concept very well, which is the signal-to-noise ratio. There is a plethora of equipment, procedures, protocols, activity that are currently embedded in sports to measure something. But what we need to be aware of is the error of measurement and the variability of those measures. Because what is biologically or performance meaningful tends to be things that actually have a big sway over variability. So when we implement a measurement system, the first thing we should understand is what is the signal, what is the noise, which means we need to invest for a period of time in understanding what normal variability looks like. Because having a single number at a certain point doesn't help us in making any decision whatsoever. And this is the argument with many of the Olympic sports, is to actually invest in data gathering initially to understand what's normal, and then once they understand what's normal, be able to make a decision. So if you are interested in this, there is plenty of information, but signal to noise, understanding signal and noise is the key of understanding measurement in sport and how we use data. Science in sport is evolving very quickly, and we are moving from, education in ancient Greece, the stopwatch, wearable technology. I think we're going to come to the end in the next 10 years. There will be so many data, we will be swamped, which has issues with storage, security, sharing, access, presenting data, analyzing data. So the role of the sports scientist is actually changing to somebody like a business analyst in a way. So I think clubs need to, or sports need to start thinking about it, to implement people that can have the big picture type of capability to inform practice and understand what's going on. Because at the moment, the biggest problem is that all these data sit in silos, in a gazillion of spreadsheets, in a variety of external hard drives, and when somebody disappears, the data disappears with them. And because they are in silo, they actually don't help in making the right call and the right decision. They help making a decision for that expert in that area, in that silo. And this is one of the problems we need to solve. Some of the relevant projects we've been involved in, this is the Esprit project, which was funded by the EPSRC. We are one of the partners, together with UK Sport, EIS, Adidas, McLaren Technologies. And this was a research project which is still ongoing, still has 2 years of funding, which was mainly about developing sensors to gather more data, better data, wearable sensors. Because one of the problems you have is the more data you want to collect, the more time commitment from the coach and the athlete. So ideally, you want to use sensors or technologies that minimize the time required by the athlete and the coach to input the information. So if you want to know more, it's plenty there. We moved our facility in UCL last year, and we are now developing actually formalizing a research group in sports analytics with expertise from different sides of the university: computer science, machine learning, psychology. There is ourselves, there is financial analysts. And we've done a few projects. We developed an IMU, for example, for an inertial measurement unit for open water swimming. They had no way of measuring what was going on with their athletes. Pretty simple stuff, GPS and accelerometry. But we are now trying to make this system available to a wider population using an open source model. So people can buy the hardware, develop their own software, do whatever they want with it, and customize it to different sports or different solutions. We are also developing some point of care testing for specific assays. We've been playing a bit with this setup with a chip-based sensor. We can get some decent levels of cortisol there, but it's still an ongoing process. And we played a bit with multiplexing. There's a lot of measurement going on in saliva because it's non-invasive. It's quite practical to do. Issues with transport. So we are trying to develop things that can allow us to measure more things when we do the analysis or measure things on the field of play very quickly. There is currently a project ongoing to develop an infrastructure for data gathering and data storage and data analysis. So there is a number of PhDs and PhD studentships available there at UCL. So if you have an interest, just get in touch and I'll direct you towards the right people. We also tried to invest a bit of time and effort in helping the coaches, because no one is actually talking about coaching, which is the biggest, I think, where the biggest gains can be made in this country. Just for numbers purposes, 90% of the coaching staff of our team sports at the Olympic Games in London was made by foreigners. So it doesn't look good, does it? It means we have a problem with coaching in team sports. And we played around a bit with this concept of helping coaches cluster and classify what they actually do and how they develop their coaching model to then help them gather data that are relevant to how they coach. So pretty simple deterministic models. You ask the coach to establish what the discipline looks like and how they break down their coaching, look at what they do in their behaviors, we call them behaviors, and then understand how they feel that knowledge and how they feel that coaching model. And it's a bit what we were hearing this morning about the army. Every coach has a philosophy and a way of coaching that is based on their belief on what athletes should do, but it's in their head. So we need to extract it and characterize it, so everything else, which is the way they train the athletes, should then produce some KPIs that are useful for the coach to manipulate the coaching process. So I think at the moment there is a lot of data gathering in athletes, what the athletes do and what the outcome, which is the performance side, so the performance analysis, but there is no data on what the coach does and what the coach thinks and how he or she shapes that philosophy and even their knowledge base. Where do they keep their notes? Where do they keep their ideas? Where do they read their stuff? Why do they think in a certain way? why they coach people in a certain way. Sadly, that project is not going ahead. And then we lead into this concept that I'm passionate about. We collect data to improve coaching. And if we want to move to an evidence-based approach, we need to use the same concept that is very well known in pharmacology, which is dose-response. What we do is we give a dose of something to our athletes, and we look at the responses. Now, the problem with the dose response in pharmacology is relatively straightforward. You give people a small pill and you get a big response. So it's very easy to see how things move. In sport, we have a huge pill, because it's the number of hours and activities that these people do, for a tiny little response. If you look at the PB's changes in elite weightlifters over the course of 2 or 3 years, it's a very tiny margin. And if you accumulate the hours of training and the volume of lifting they do, it's a big pill for a small change. Of course, what you know is that when they have a big change, they are taking another pill. But that's analytics. That's what tells you, that's why, for example, in anti-doping should be used, some of the KPIs could be used. But I think we should look at data in this way. So if we use the dose-response approach, what we need to understand is quantify training, what's the dose, which is the input to what we do, and how performance looks like. So we're getting to grips to some of the performance things. I think we still don't understand well what the dose is. And the dose is quite complex. And that's the output. And this is what typically happens. This is a rugby player in a professional rugby team, training load, session RPE, pretty simple stuff. And you get some indications of how that training load changes. And sometimes you find an episode. So in this particular case, this was an athlete that had a ramp up in training load and became ill in this week. Sometimes there is an easy association, but many times it's not as straightforward as it looks. Plus, I experience a lot of problems with the session RPE data because some people don't understand and cannot relate to how they feel. So we come back to how people learn and how people understand the messages you give them. And this is quite an interesting concept. If we understand the dose response very well in the group of athletes we look at, and we can identify what's the optimal dose, it's a bit like the low diminishing returns in financial terms. So what we want to understand is how much investment in time and effort we put in certain areas to get the maximum return. And at the moment, despite the fact that we do a lot of measurement, overall people do the same things over and over again. And individualization on load is actually a concept, it's not actually happening. And it's probably because we don't have enough data to make proper judgment on that. In the literature, there are some models that have been used in the past. System biology type of models. This is the work of Thierry Bousseau. Now, the problem with those, and we tested a few, they were very popular in the 90s. Somehow they disappeared from the literature. The problem with this concept is that they are very good, but they were all based on people that never trained before. They started training for a period of time, and they improved in their KPIs by 35%. We know very well it doesn't happen at the elite level. So actually, when we tested that model with our short track team, this is their periodization. This is the actual number of laps they have done over a 3 years period. And the different colors is the number of laps at different intensities. Again, a simple sport to measure. And when we had as KPIs only their performance data, the prediction was really not good, and it didn't fit to the model. And actually, if you look at the quality of fit, it wasn't there. So we played with different models, and it's not as straightforward as it looks. So what we're doing now is we have access to a number of athletes that have been followed for 1 year on a variety of measures. And we will play a little bit with modeling to try to understand if those models that exist in the literature are actually applicable to a real group of people that are actually well trained, and try to develop some ideas on how to analyze this time series data in a more meaningful manner. The last point I want to make, it's about data visualization. Despite the fact that we generate a lot of numbers, I think we still need to make a lot of improvements in the way we present them to coaches and athletes. They get scared by numbers, they don't understand them. And I worked in some sports where the coach doesn't even use a computer or a tablet or anything else. He's got pen and paper. And he's a 65 years old guy, he's not interested. You show him a graph and he's going to faint. But this is an example for blood tests. You know, we go to do a blood test in the hospital, and this is the kind of stuff we get, which looks like a KGB document from Russia. It doesn't mean anything to anybody. But, you know, this is the same document. These are the data presented in exactly the same way, and they make a different impact. So I think using data and filtering what's important and presenting them in the appropriate manner makes a big impact. So it's about reducing the information and only presenting the relevant information, and leaving all the big stuff behind can make a difference and can help the athletes and the coach understand. Of course, one of the problems we have is that when we have multidisciplinary teams, everyone is generating data and reports, and the last thing you want is that there is a 20 pages information that goes into the athletes. So simple, concise ways of presenting information, it's the way forward. We need to engage with people in other industries to actually help us do that. And I've seen some beautiful graphs here today. This is very important because it's not only about the athletes. I think there is a lot that we can do and learn in professional sport that can actually transfer to the general public rather than the other way around. We tend to do things with the general public to then transfer to sport. Actually, as a community, we should shout from the rooftop that we can help a lot of the problems in other populations if we get a bit more funding and money to do what we need to do, because that can transfer to what other people do, and that's, you know, kids or all the elderly. I have to acknowledge a variety of people for some of the data you've seen and some of the collaborations we do with different universities and different institutions, but this is my favorite one. If you, this is the one I always show the coaches. Coaches are very reluctant to give their information because it's black magic, it's a special art, it's a special program, it's in their head, they feel they lose their IP. But this is a fantastic one. You know, you need to understand why you failed to improve, but most of all, you need to understand what you got right, because otherwise it must have been an accident. And I think in performance sport, there have been quite a few accidents over the years, and we need to capture the right information to find out what's the secret and what was special about it. Thank you very much.